Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nola and this is the 30th of August 2023, and I'm sitting in a place called Beachmont at the top of the mountain. I may or may not get the opportunity to come back here again because I'll be moving our operation further north in the southeast portion of Queensland. But I thought we're almost springtime in Australia, and I thought this is a perfect day to come and show you this magnificent scenery behind me. And if you look hard enough, you can see the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, from this vantage point. It's just really serene and lovely up here. I'm sitting near an old schoolhouse, and they run a cafe and they have markets and things, and it's really, really special area. There's not very many houses around, maybe 200 houses, I guess, in the whole area. So a very small population, but hopefully you'll be able to hear birds and enjoy the scenery. Last time I talked about the first E in the word peace, which means in my model for peace, empowerment. And I wanted to talk with you about what that really means at an personal level as we grow over time. So over this episode and over future episodes, I'm going to talk through empowerment in the context of age groups. Today it will be about empowerment of children, literally from birth through to when they finish their primary education, their grade school education. As I was driving up here, I was thinking about the previous podcast, and I know I talked about motivation. The strongest motivation comes from within, and that's something that I've included here in my first book, No Boxing Allowed. But it's you can't really have motivation without foundational stuff. And ultimately, the foundational stuff to motivation and empowerment is good memories. Now, from conception through to 7 is the key developmental time for a child. What they hear in utero, what they experience from the second that they're born, through to those very formative years where you're programming them with values, with attitudes, you're teaching behaviours, you're demonstrating good and bad, and you're allowing them to be exposed to good and bad things. You as a parent have to risk manage that pivotal time as much as you can with only them in mind, not with you in mind. So you need to be, as a parent, incredibly selfless from conception to 7, so that you're setting your child up for the very best possible outcome. Now, there's a number of things I'm going to talk through today, and first things first, it's interesting when I see the volume of plagiarism that has occurred as a result of me putting the content of this book on social media, on business media like LinkedIn, and where those words, quote for quote, have been plagiarized by others, spouted as their own. What I found the most concerning is when there's no acknowledgement of what is copyright and what is already published. And what happens in the world of plagiarism is that people get a hold of something, they read it in a book and they think, oh, I'll just use that. I'll use that in my teaching. I'll use that in my next assignment. I'll put that out on social media as my idea. And what that does is denigrate the original author's vision and their thinking that they've brought to the world in the very first instance. Now, it is very rare that two people will think of exactly the same sequence of words, particularly in context of things like leadership and great leadership. There are a lot of people who are spouting that great leaders are one thing. In this book, great leadership is defined as a bunch of things together. It's not just one thing. You can not be a great leader and have only one of those traits. You need to live them all. And that's why this book, when it was first released, I wrote it in 2007. I gave it to a major publisher in Australia, and the acquisitions editor gave my manuscript to a spiritual leader in Sydney. He then, as I witnessed myself, read from my book, spouted my words as if they were his own. So I knew before this was even published and before it hit the market that the words were very powerful. And that's probably why in 2011, when I entered it in a North American book competition to see whether the words were going to be perceived more globally in the same way, it was deemed the best inspirational book out of all the books in 2011. Now, prior to 2011, I had sent this book and my second book on change management for women and men to Oprah Winfrey, to Barack Obama, because he had just been elected president. And I've now found, quite by accident on social media, I think it was Instagram, Oprah Winfrey quoting what's written in this book. And it amuses me, but it also makes me understand that there are so many people who will take somebody else's idea and claim it as their own. And I can hold my hand on my heart and say there is not one thing in here that has not come from my lived experience. And that's why I wrote this book. That's why it's so important that people heal themselves of what the baggage that they're carrying, the emotional baggage. They learn how to recognize the energy that channels in the body, that courses through the body, so they understand what negative energy feels like. Negative energy that comes from things like fear, unfounded usually. Negative energy that comes from people wanting to control a situation before it's even come to be. Negative energy that comes from wanting to seek revenge. So this book is all about, this is the foundation for every single thing that Serenidad Consulting and the Peace Ranch is all about. It was going to be my second book, but as I was writing it, I realised it needed to be the first, because it was setting all the foundation stones for everything going forward. Now, when we talk about empowerment and children, the thing that I thought of as I drove the 600 metres up to this mountaintop was that children need to be empowered through creating positive memories. And when you're empowering children with positive memories, they're more likely to know how, as an adult later in life, to let go of the negative and focus on the positive. If you constantly criticize, remind a child that they're a failure, and that's the F word that I'm going to talk about in a moment, the bad F word, worse than the other F word, but the bad F word that we really need to stop using. There are a bunch of words we need to stop using, but that F word in particular. If you're programming your child that they are not good enough, that they did something and it was wrong when it actually wasn't wrong, if you think about when a little baby starts to crawl and they head towards the electricity, the socket in the wall, and you as a parent haven't plugged those sockets with safety plugs so that they can't stick something in and get hurt. If they stick something into that power socket, it's not their fault. They don't have the wherewithal, the worldliness, the knowledge, the experience that you do as a parent. And if you blame them for doing something wrong, they're immediately going to take that as almost like a little notch out of their self-esteem. You're going to say to them, you weren't good enough because you didn't get it right. You're saying to your child, you should have known that was risky. You should have known that was unsafe. No, a child is a blank tape. From conception to 7, they are like a blank tape. You are recording stuff, and if you keep recording negative messages of criticism and that are not founded in a positive educational approach, you're setting your child up for disempowerment later. The happy memories side of it is probably something people don't necessarily understand, how we get our volume of happy memories and what happens to the negative memories. The way the conscious and the subconscious minds work is, I'm in conscious mode. I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm not asleep. I'm not in a trance-like state. I'm discerning things. I'm keeping my ears open to things like snakes. It's silly not to in Australia. I'm mindful of the sun and how long to be out when I don't have sunblock on. So I'm consciously aware of my surroundings, and I'm empowered to make a choice and make a change quickly at any time. The unconscious mind works when we're not alert and awake. So the unconscious mind is, if you can imagine, it's a bit like the filing cabinet of memories. And when we go to sleep, whether it's a day sleep, a nap in the middle of the day, or whether it's at night time, the longer that unbroken sleep, the better for our conscious mind to literally drop into the bin of the unconscious and say, well, okay, here's all the things that I've experienced, thought of, spoken about, had said to me today. Now, subconscious mind, please go ahead and filter out what I don't need to remember. And the two important things here is that the subconscious mind will retain things to keep you happy and things to keep you safe. What you have to understand, though, is that the memories associated with things to keep you safe may be unhappy memories for a while, but over time, once you let go of the emotional connection to those memories, they won't become unhappy memories. You can have a memory resurface, or almost like a repeat of a situation happen later in life. It's not a lesson that you have to learn again, but it might be something very similar that happens to you later in life, where it brings back the memory of that previous situation, because the memory's in your subconscious, and it's like pulling it out of the filing cabinet. Oh, I remember this scenario, but in the now, the experience of the now sort of connects to that memory, and you can have a negative emotion or a positive emotion depending on what that current experience was like. Now, if the previous experience wasn't as traumatic as the current experience, then you might need to take time with the current experience to let go of the emotional connection to that memory. I know that's probably difficult to understand, but in this book I talk about letting go of baggage and the process that you go through in No Boxing Allowed. It's all about no labels, no restrictions, no living based on other people's expectations, no allowing people to box you into a certain category. You're a certain horoscope, you're a certain type of personality. Oh, you can't do that because you're a certain gender. None of that is healthy for good relationships and for peace in relationships. So this book teaches you how to let go and use things like self-hypnosis and relaxation and meditation to let go of the emotional attachment to the memories that you might have. And that will happen over time at the rate and to the efficacy of how you are as a person, what you're currently living as experiences, what your diet is, how healthy you are, how well your brain synapses work. All of that stuff is going to have an influence over how well and how quickly you can let go of negative emotions associated with memories. Memories are good, and what you don't remember is also okay. Remember, you have a memory of things that keep you happy and things that keep you safe. So whilst you have a negative emotion associated with the memory, there's obviously an issue around risk management and safety, self-preservation that you need to work through. You need to understand, does that risk still exist? If not, I can let go of any fear, any negative emotion. That's never going to happen again. I know it won't happen again. Or you might say, okay, I have a negative response. I feel emotional about that memory. Is it possible that might come back again? And if so, you need to stay alert. Autonomic nervous system, fight, flight, and so on. You need to stay alert to the risks associated with having that negative memory, negative emotional attachment to the memory. But you also need to, over time, do that risk evaluation again and say, is this risk likely to realise? If not, let it go. Let go of the negative emotion. The reason I talk about this in terms of empowerment is for children, they're learning from their substantial influences, and the people who are going to be in their inner sanctum predominantly for the first conception to 7 period in their lives. So we're talking about parents, grandparents, caregivers, medical practitioners, other doctors, dentists, school teachers, preschool facilitators, friends of the family, children from older children from other families. All of these people that are in your child's universe are likely, very likely in most circumstances, to influence them and to program them. So if you know that your friends have a child who's 15 who's a bully, you're better off keeping your child away from that child until they're at least 7 and give them education about positive behaviours so they can recognise the bully. Because I can tell you, when they're 1 or 2 years of age and they've got a 15-year-old bully that they're interacting with, they're not going to know how to deal with the bully. And what the bully says to them quietly, whispering in the ear, is going to impact them, and it's going to program into their subconscious, because they're going to remember when they're in a conscious state, and even when they're in utero, somewhat unconscious, what you're saying and the energy around what's being said to that child is going to impact them, either negatively or positively, of what they're hearing. Now, the F word, the failure word. I was skimming through LinkedIn and getting updates. I don't post very much on LinkedIn, but when I do the updates of the Peace Bites, I sometimes look through the feed, and there was this fellow who was spouting, from all your failures, you will learn and grow. And I thought, well, seriously? how silly of that person not to realise that that is a ambiguous statement. Because in No Boxing Allowed, towards the end of the book, there are no failures in life, only opportunities from which to learn and grow. And that's the quote. There are no failures, not by humans. And I'll tell you why I believe that's so. The mere fact that you are alive, the mere fact that your child is born, that is a miracle in itself. Human life is in itself not ever going to be a failure because of the system of systems that are in us. The fact that we have a soul, that's not a failure. The fact that we have a brain and we can use our intellect to discern things. The fact that we can contribute to humanity, no matter what that contribution might be. How can we dare say that any human being, no matter what they do or what they say, has been a failure? I come from multiple careers, and my second significant career, and something that stayed with me since, obviously, is information and communication technology. And as an ICT techo, as a programmer, systems analyst, systems designer, systems engineer, global project leader, all of those roles were responsible for creating solutions, business solutions, that enabled organisations to be more efficient and effective. Now, if a piece of hardware, CPU, disk drive, terminal, user terminal, if those pieces of hardware and the software that ran them failed, then the system goes down. But you think about the human body and how restorative the human body is purely because of this thing called homeostasis. The general adaptation syndrome that is part of every single human being on Earth, if you imagine a line that when we're in homeostasis, it's fairly well level. We get a stressor that will either pick us into a negative response or actually subdue us into a depressed response. We get super alert. We have to act out something. We have to, we get an adrenaline rush to compensate, or we get the body almost reversing that alertness state. So it goes into a depressed systemic level in order for us to cope with that stressor, no matter what that stressor is. Homeostasis is something that the general adaptation syndrome strives for every day, all day, even when we're asleep. Excuse me while I have a little drink. We cannot operate without stressors. We cannot. Our body is designed to take environmental stressors, relationship stressors, internal systemic stressors, dietary stressors. Our body is required to adapt. The general adaptation syndrome is all about our body adapting to what is like an onslaught. If we don't eat well, we might get digestive upset. That's a stressor in itself. If we get too caught up in the emotion of something, that becomes a stressor in itself. And the big thing is when all of those stressors come together as a group. Then we have these huge spikes where the general adaptation syndrome takes us from a state of homeostasis to where we're peaking and troughing, and we're having to find balance. Once we get back into balance, everything kind of ticks along well. We sleep well, we respond to our food well, we are able to manage our emotions well, we stay positive, we have good relationships with other people. So that level of harmony is what you're aiming for. So your resilience comes from the ability to manage the peaks and the troughs. Every single human being on this face of the earth, including myself, has had a situation where you've had a peak or a trough in that general adaptation syndrome response, and it might take years to get back to homeostasis. It might take you 3 seconds. It depends on the stressor, it depends on your level of resilience, and it depends on historically how well you've looked after yourself. So think about kids here and empowering children holistically. Think about what you're feeding them verbally, what you're allowing them to ingest, who you're allowing them to interact with. Think about what you're saying to them, how you're programming them. Are you seeing everything that they do, like not walking before they're a year old, as a failure? Are you putting your expectation on a child, and because they don't meet your timing, they're the failure? There are no failures in life. There are things that we experience and opportunities that we have that allow us to learn and grow. Get rid of that F word out of your vocabulary, and the other one for preference, and you and your children will be a lot more empowered than what they currently are and what you currently are. The other thing I want to draw attention to just before we finish this episode is, imagine a world where every child is taught from conception to 7 that sharing is good, that caring about people and themselves is good, that compassion for self and others is good, that being honest is good, that doing the right thing is good, that not being brash and wanting it all for themselves is good. It's okay to be selfless. They don't teach them to be selfish. Imagine our world now if every child had those messages from the very beginning. We wouldn't have the situations and the episodes that we do now. We would not have wars.